Gentlemen, we're waiting for at least one member of the Budget Committee as it is a joint hearing. The chairman of the Budget Committee apparently is on his way. There was another responsibility on the schedule as far as committee assignments. And so once we get at least one person from the Budget Committee, we will commence the items on the agenda. Fritz, the Information Technology and Government Affairs and Budget and Finance Committee's special joint meeting will now come to order. We have a full complement of the members here from the IT Committee and a minority presence, not minority present, but minority presence of the Budget Committee. And so we will begin by taking up item number 2 on the agenda. We still have a minority presence, but we do have 2 members of the Budget Committee here now with Mr. Kretz and Chairman Parks. Again, we'll begin with item number 2. And for that item, 9/10 of the discussion appears it will be with the City Attorney. So therefore, what is the status of the room behind us? Because sometimes when we go into closed session, that room is available to us. It is, okay. Looking at the number of the crowd here, it'd probably get very crowded in that hallway there. And I think the people that need to address us can fit in the room behind us. So we're going to go into closed session on item number 2. Okay, and we'll be back.
Good afternoon. Patty Huber from the CAO. Before you is our second status report from the working group regarding the Google implementation. In our first report, just briefly, we had discussed some of the feature and performance concerns that had been identified, as well as the concerns with several of the security features required by LAPD that had not at that time been resolved. Because of this, ITA had recommended, and the working group had concurred, that the remaining 6,000 employees would not be migrated until some of these issues were resolved. Since that last report, progress has been made towards resolving the concerns previously identified. But I would say that while ITA, LAPD, and our contractor, CSC Google, are developing plans to begin implementation of interim security measures that will be acceptable to LAPD and DOJ within the first quarter of this fiscal year, the delays to the schedule have resulted in the need to continue group-wise licenses for at least 1 quarter of this fiscal year for both LAPD and the remaining 6,000 users. This cost is approximately $135,000 for licenses and some associated applications that have annual renewal fees due during this first quarter. At this time, ITA has indicated they're reasonably confident that interim solutions for LAPD can be implemented that would allow them to migrate within the first quarter. However, if there are further delays to the security issue, the city will incur additional costs to keep LAPD on group-wise, ranging from a little over $66,000 a quarter to $147,000 per quarter, up to a maximum of approximately $415,000 if they had to stay on group-wise for the full year. In order to minimize the ongoing costs to the city, we have recommended that the remaining 6,000 employees be migrated as soon as practicable. And so the costs included in our report are based on the assumption that that would occur. As noted, LAPD has issued a report detailing the security concerns in more detail than we have identified in our report, and both they and ITA are available to discuss those issues for you.
Thank you. I have a handful of questions. However, I think 2 of our members of the IT, or 1?
I got a 3:30.
Okay. You have any questions you want to ask before you have to head out?
Yes, the issue regarding the contract performance issues, was security one of the issues on contract performance?
Yes, the contract does detail security requirements, and those are continuing to be worked out between our contractor, ITA, and LAPD.
And you mentioned an expense to the city of $415,000 possibly. Why would we have to pay that if part of the contract calls for the security aspect, and if Google that's bringing this system online can't perform to the standard that's been agreed upon, why should we have to pay a penalty for them not performing to the anticipated expectation of the police department for security purposes?
That's the cost to the city, and until there is some agreement by the contractor that they're willing to assist us with those costs, the city is going to have to assume them for now, because we have to pay group-wise.
But part of the agreement was they would meet a certain performance. Part of that performance is security. So if that is not met, why would we have to pay a penalty when they haven't met the security requirement? It's their obligation, not ours. They're putting the system in place. And if it's part of the agreement, why are we then saddled with additional costs, whether it's $66,000 or $400,000? It should be their expense, not our expense. Same thing with in-car video. In-car video hasn't been perfected. The manufacturer, the installer, they're picking up the tab on that, not the city. This should be the same way. Why aren't they agreeing to do that? And there's some issues about Google itself, but one of the issues I have is with the security aspect that's stated in this report. You got a certain contract performance. If they're not measuring up, why do we have to pay instead of them taking care of it at their cost?
Certainly, Councilman Zine, the points that you raise are very, very valid here in terms of the actual contract. I think that there have been some assumptions of functionality related to security that was going to be there that wasn't there, and some time frames that have gotten extended, and we really haven't gotten down to having a detailed discussion yet with the contractor on the costs of the delays to that level. I know that Miguel Santana had reached out to the president of CSC to talk to them, since they're the prime, about the contract, and particularly start to talk about a potential cost-sharing arrangement. I don't believe there are any more details associated with that.
It was very preliminary.
It was very, Patty said it was very
I don't see
preliminary.
a cost sharing. I see it's their expense. If I go out and buy a car, and that car is not performing, there's a warranty for 3 years, 36,000 miles, or 5 years, 100,000 miles, something goes wrong, that engine blows up, the manufacturer's going to pick up that tab, not me. We're at that stage where we haven't even accepted the vehicle under the warranty, and they're going to charge us a penalty because we haven't met a deadline when they haven't performed to the reasonable expectation, and security is part of it for the police department. I just don't understand how we get involved without them performing to that level. And then the warranty comes in. We haven't even gone online yet citywide. So I don't understand why we're going backwards as far as the obligation for financial responsibility versus forward.
Well, I think there's going to be two aspects of this discussion. One's going to be covering the city in terms of the group-wise maintenance, which is the $135,000 we talked about for the first quarter. That's the city cost to maintain the system. And that would have to be discussed with CSC Google to see if they'd pick up that cost. And then there could potentially be, and I'm not sure about this, but an additional cost associated with the elongation of the project out through the first quarter, which is looking like it's going to be about that period of time where CSC/Google may request additional funding for that. So there's two components that we need to deal with them on. One is their potential costs for that, and then the second is the licensing costs for group-wise in order for us to maintain a certain level of the system for this quarter.
Then there's the issue of DOJ and the security requirements that must be met.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can't meet DOJ requirements for the police department, they really can't do their law enforcement. So
Maggie's here, she'll talk to that. We have spent a huge amount of time between ourselves, all of us here, and the DOJ and Google and CSC ironing out what those requirements are and how the Google solution will meet those requirements. I think we're very close. We have a few more things to do, but I think we're very close to fulfilling the requirements. Some of them will be in an interim manner, some will be in a long-term manner, and then there will be other deliverables that Google has committed to making, on paper in terms of the long-term solution for those.
Maggie, can you respond to that part?
Sure. You're correct, Councilmember. I mean, bottom line is that the security requirements weren't delivered in time for us to migrate by June 30th. And
Whose fault
so,
was that?
in my opinion, it was Google that didn't deliver the security requirements,
Okay.
Google and CSC.
Okay.
For that reason, we're going to have to extend our group-wise licenses at a minimum 1 quarter at the cost that the CAO has broken out for you. It's not an LAPD contract, so if it were an LAPD contract, I would say that, I would be asking Google or CSC to pay just as you said, like we did in the in-car video situation.
See, that's the concern I have. We know the city's having financial problems. We know we're laying off city employees. We know we're cutting back. IT's been cut back. All these departments have been cut back. And Google comes in with this sweetheart deal that was supposed to be state-of-the-art, supposed to make wonders, and obviously they haven't performed. So if they haven't performed, we're paying for their inability to perform not only to the LAPD standard, but the standard prescribed by the Department of Justice. I don't see why we are required to take care of their inability to measure up to that standard.
I think the issue is, at this point, they have not agreed to pay that cost. It is an item for discussion that we will have to take to them. In the interim, the city has to pay group-wise.
Well, while they
And so
haven't
we
agreed to
have
pay-
to, we do have to pay the bill.
Well, while they haven't agreed to pay that cost, they've agreed to give us a system, I would assume, that measures up to a standard.
Yes.
And if they haven't done that, then there's a responsibility for them to make sure that's done. And if it's not done, then there's a problem. Why do we have to pay for their inability to perform to the standard that we need for law enforcement? And obviously it isn't done. So now we have to stand group-wise at additional expense to us. So I mean, if Google's a multi-billion-dollar operation, why can't they either make it work or pay while we end up working with them to make it work?
I will say that they have been trying to make it work. I would say that there has been a little bit of ambiguity around some of the requirements. I think there has been. And I think that part of the clarity that we have gotten in this project has been due to the fact that Maggie came on board, and there was a different person in her position prior to this, and that was an issue for us on the project.
Well, let me say this. I will not criticize Maggie for her ability to correct what was going down the wrong road with the former individual that was in her position. The former individual did a terrible job and left, not with a ceremony. She came in to save a sinking ship, and fortunately she saved it, so no disrespect to what she's been able to turn around.
Well, no, it's been a good thing. I mean, my comment is positive, that it's been a good thing having her on board and also being more of a liaison with the Department of Justice and creating the dialogue that really needed to have occurred beforehand.
Well, I would say I can't vote for anything that's going to cost us money when Google should be picking up the tab because they haven't performed. So I'll be a no vote on anything dealing with us paying additional cost because of Google not performing. And if Google wants to get slammed, then Google can get slammed in the press for not performing to a level satisfactory to the police department of the city of Los Angeles, which I'm sure would hurt their reputation and any other city looking into using Google as a supplier for the IT. That's it for me.
Thank you. As it is 3:30, thank you very much, Mr. Zine, for your participation in the meeting. Yes. Double referred. At least the council member's been double referred. Okay. Chairman of the Budget Committee, a lot of this has to do with the finances. If you have any questions?
I have several concerns. One of the things I wonder, in the contract, does it have any safeguards that if they didn't fulfill their commitment, that
I can't hear
are
what
part of the contract? In fact, is anybody from Google here?
Yes, we have several people from Google here, but I couldn't hear your
I was
question.
wondering, is there anything in the contract, as it's currently stated, that are safeguards against them failing to meet their requirements?
Kevin is the expert on the contract here.
I'm Kevin Crawford from ITA. Yes, there are safeguards in the contract, both where we can cancel just because we want to. We have safeguards in there for the statement of work as prescribed by what we expect to have delivered. So both of those are safeguarded by the contract.
I know, but what about cost? I mean, that we recover cost, or they pay for, I mean, because the eventuality was if they didn't meet this due date, and I think, if I remember correctly, we've been talking about the law enforcement criteria since this inception of this project.
Yes.
And we've been promised, in fact, I was on the phone with the president of Google, and he guaranteed that they'd meet June 30th. 2 days later, what is it, CSC? CSC had a meeting and said it was physically impossible to meet June 30th. So that's the disparity that we've had. And it's not just LAPD. Maggie, what other law enforcement are part of this?
Oh, my understanding is that the individuals from General Services related to Office of Public Safety, there are some individuals in the criminal section of the city attorney's office, and I'm not positive, but it may also apply to some of the park rangers, arson investigators.
One of the concerns I have, Randy, is that although Maggie came in and maybe brought more clarity, DOJ has been clear. They have not wavered one bit as to what the standards were, what they expected, and the clarity was that if they didn't get that standard, they wouldn't communicate with the law enforcement agency. So that was in this room, and every room we talked about Google, they had to meet that criteria. June 30th was important. If they didn't meet the criteria, how we're going to go forward, and whether we should be going forward on migration of other employees if they don't meet this standard. And what really concerns me on page, what is it? The last page of Maggie's report that said that the timeline for LAPD migration cannot be provided. That tells me that we could be off into another fiscal year, all through this current fiscal year. And I don't think it's been unclear as to, at least from my standpoint and others, LAPD and public safety had to be satisfied on this system, and we're not there.
We met before this meeting because we had some updates from Google on some of the functionality that were related here to security, and I think we're much closer now than we thought before, where we could possibly achieve an implementation either by the end of September or rolling into sometime in October.
Have we ever discussed with them, as we knew June 30th was not going to be an accurate date, what their financial responsibility, has that been broached at all?
We had an initial discussion with them, but we haven't had subsequent discussions. We were trying to really focus on nailing down the security requirements so we could move forward.
Okay, when will that formally occur? Because we're now into July, which means that we have to make a financial commitment in order for the rest of the city employees to still have group-wise.
We're scheduled to have some kind of conversation next week. I wanted to have Miguel as part of that conversation.
Okay, now is it hinged on our moving forward on the remaining 6,000 city employees if this isn't satisfied?
There's two pieces to this, to the answer to that question. One is we could move the rest of the 6,000 right now. We do want the security requirements to be completely finalized and fleshed out, because the situation that we don't want to have is that for some reason it doesn't, and then we have LAPD on a separate email system.
I know, but that's what we said over the last couple of years. We said the worst situation could be that everybody's on and LAPD says, I can't move because of the security. And we're losing our leverage in the fact if we are migrating everyone else, pretty soon it will not be important to Google to satisfy that issue because you have 20,000 people on their system. And how much does it cost to revert from that?
Well, actually, that's why I had recommended that we stop the migrations in June, when it appeared that it was going to take more time to satisfy the security requirements. And we had moved about 10,000 people at that point. And there's another 5,000 or 6,000 in the city that need to be moved. I can tell you that not being on one email system, even just, excluding LAPD, is causing us a lot of operational problems right now, where we have to basically deal with being on the two systems and keeping them synchronized, and it's a very difficult effort. We've had a lot of problems with this. So, the other school of thought is for us to move the other 5,000 or 6,000 as soon as possible to alleviate these operational problems. We have in writing from Google CSC when they're, what the plan is, when they expect to deliver. And what we need to do is then, with Maggie, as we had discussed, do some testing of what they're delivering, and then we would be able to sign it off.
I mean, is it your sense that we lose leverage the more you migrate?
No, I don't think we lose leverage, because at the end of the day, Google needs to see this work so that they can sell it to other people. If they don't make this work, it's not going to be very good for them to try and sell this to other governments.
I know, but that doesn't say a word about what condition we're in. We're sitting here saying, well, we showed you, it didn't work, but that doesn't help us with 20, 30,000 employees to communicate.
Well, I still don't think we lose any leverage, because they have a lot more to lose than not working in the city of LA.
But we've said that about June 30th. They have a lot to lose if they don't meet that due date. And they haven't lost a thing. In fact, we're talking about giving them 6,000 more people.
Well, Chairman,
Was that an answer, or that was just a give up, or
No,
red flag?
no, it's called a difference of opinion. That's what it is.
But the thing is, giving them 6,000 more people, that's worded a little interesting, because those people still work for the city of Los Angeles. Bottom line is, aside from this table of first quarter, 135,000, second quarter, 147,000, potential cost, 66,000, and next, 66,000 for a total of 415,000, that doesn't speak to the productivity loss.
That's right.
So basically, on that point, Mr. Chairman, when it comes to the productivity loss, basically, the bottom line is, in next year's budget deliberations, if we have a half-baked old system that we're paying for licenses for, and a half-baked new system that is incomplete, we just may, as a city, go back to our old system, or bite the bullet and figure out a way to force the new system in and hope it works as well as it was sold to us, or perhaps go back out to RFP, and then which makes a lot of people very happy. Google's not the only multi-billion-dollar company in this fight. You got Microsoft, you got a lot of other companies or what have you. So I think what Randy's speaking to is, apart from the contractual responsibilities, there's motivation for everybody, at least involved right now with the City of Los Angeles, not the people who would like to see this fail outside the city, but people within the City of Los Angeles, to see our productivity continue to flow, and also to see this implementation continue to go forward, hopefully successfully and productively. And then as an end result, we actually have LAPD on board when we finally get DOJ and all these other outside interests to sign off and say, now your police department can utilize it for all avenues of their department activities because it meets the muster of the requirements that we have on security. So right now what we have is we're straddled across the Grand Canyon, and we can go back, we can go forward, and who's going to pay for going forward? If we go back, Mr. Parks, it's going to be more in your committee because you're going to have to figure out how we're going to pay for going backwards. And right now the question is Councilmember Zine was saying, perhaps the interested parties who we're already working with to go forward, perhaps they should think twice about whether or not they should just bite the bullet and pick up those costs specifically for the security requirements that are required of the police department, and we should all go forward.
Yeah. See, my concern is with this issue that's looming, we can't even get to the recent survey and what operationally people think about the system. And so that's, I mean, so we can't even get to that to say whether it actually is functional, because we can't get there as it relates to the system. And so let me ask if Google, if somebody here can speak for Google, or are you just attending to observe, or?
Maybe Kevin's.
My name is Jocelyn Dingham, and I'm the Director of Operations for Google Enterprise. I'm sorry, may I ask for you to repeat the question?
I would just like to know, you've heard the conversation. What can you tell us as to the commitment of Google, now that we missed June 30th, meeting the law enforcement element? And secondly, the issue that the survey information that has been accumulated about what people feel are the deficiencies in the program, what is the commitment there? And what, if anything, you could say about whether if we got to continue two different programs, what is Google's commitment as to taking on that financial responsibility?
Right. So let me address the questions one at a time. Number one is, let me express Google's commitment to meeting the city's requirements. We have 100% commitment, and as demonstrated by all the things that we've delivered over the last couple of weeks. We've moved forward the delivery of GovCloud. It is now live in production. We've committed to all the feature gaps that our users have asked for, and we are now working very closely with the Department of, with the LAPD, along with the requirements of the DOJ, to make sure that we meet all the requirements in order to be able to move forward. And we have the highest level of commitment.
The same commitments you made when you got the contract?
Yes, they are,
Okay.
but
And
I would offer...
let us know what and why we didn't meet the committed due dates then.
Point well taken. I would just offer that having implemented a lot of systems of this type before, hindsight is 20/20. There were some details that we missed in the original scoping of the requirements. It wasn't until when we dug down in detail with the LAPD that some of the very specific requirements around data segregation, physical isolation of servers, and their e-discovery requirements that emerged. And we have since acted on all of those since they emerged as
Let me just, I have to disagree with you a little bit. I don't think DOJ has changed one word from the original comments they made about this system. And we may have had a change internally, we might have different views, but DOJ has been consistent as to what they said the requirements were, and they are the guide. And so this late flurry after June 30th doesn't get us where we want to go, and now we're talking about it could be the first quarter of this fiscal year, it could be the second quarter, it could be unknown. And I think many of us said the last position we wanted to be in is having everybody on one system and LAPD and public safety on another, and we're paying both organizations.
Yeah.
So we need to know what and how quickly this could be done, and whether there's a commitment to pay our expense on group-wise.
So prior to this meeting, we sat down with Maggie, and we laid out a work schedule, which makes it possible for us to migrate all users. We focused and worked hard on it, with all hands on deck on the Google side to deliver on the technical aspects of this by the end of September. It will take a lot of focus. You have 100% commitment. I will be personally involved in this on both sides to make sure that that happens.
What about the finances?
With respect to the finances, I think we'll have to have that follow-on conversation. To Randy's point, we have not started on that. We focused on the delivery of the content first, and I'm happy to participate in that conversation as well.
Well, let me say this. I would not be supportive of migrating until we have a commitment for the law enforcement, because I don't think that puts us in a good position to, we know you can migrate because there's several thousand people on the system now, and several thousand people have a different view of how good the system is and things of that nature. So migrating isn't our issue. Our issue has always fundamentally been DOJ and law enforcement in the city had to be satisfied because they couldn't operate otherwise. And so until, for me anyway, until we can get that clarified and a definite due date, and until we can get the dollar figures of what that commitment is to what Google is not going to cost the city of LA any more money, I'm not supportive of migrating not one more person to the system.
Go ahead. Right. So there's a second part of your question that you asked me, and I'd like to respond to that, and that is the issue of having users in different environments. I would just offer that a best practice in migrating email systems is to keep the period of coexistence as short as possible, because these email systems are not architected to coexist, and the contingent that will have the most difficult time in the period of coexistence are the end users. And until we get everybody who will communicate actively with each other on the same email system, we will not get an accurate read of the efficacy from an end user productivity
And
standpoint.
that's exactly what you told us months ago, and we bought the system, and we're not where we should be, and we wanted to migrate with the police department and everybody simultaneously. So that's where we are. And I agree, if everybody's on the same system, I agree it should be smoother. The problem is we're not there.
Well, we also had a plan that had us migrating in batches, and we stopped it in June because we wanted to pause and say, let's make sure that we address the issues associated with the LAPD. In my opinion, and I would assert this, and I would not say this just for the sake of saying it and for convenience, that we have addressed, and we now know what the requirements are for the LAPD. We have all hands on deck addressing them, and we will stay in very close touch with Maggie with a testing plan that gets us there. And so meanwhile, my recommendation, I agree with the committee's recommendation that the prudent thing to do is to migrate the 6,000 users so that we can get a good read, and it will be a positive read of the increased productivity of the end users.
And the timing of that migration?
It is at the city's discretion. We talked about a couple of possibilities. We can migrate now. We can migrate in a week or two.
But you can't migrate LAPD now.
We can't. We have to go through all the tests that Maggie had spelled out for us, and we're thinking that if we followed that plan, we will migrate the LAPD in the September timeframe.
So if we were to go in phases, you would concur that moving the additional 6,000 non-LAPD and other security personnel to the new system, and then after that phase, then if all the tests go as well as expected, then we could move the rest over.
That's correct.
Any thoughts on that, Maggie? Or is that consistent with the way you see it today? As far as your folks?
As far as when the other 6,000 migrated, it doesn't affect the LAPD. As far as the department's concerned, it will depend on how the testing goes over the next month. I'm told that there are items that will be delivered to me on August 2nd. I'll have to evaluate those, make sure that they meet the standards, and then we'll, at that point, if what they deliver on the August 2nd is acceptable, we'll have to start a small pilot to ensure that they've met all the security requirements.
Anything you'd like to add, Randy?
Rob Huff is here
No,
from,
that's correct.
Rob Huff is here from CSC, and they're the prime, and I thought he could address some of the financial questions.
Sure. Thank you for having us today.
What's your name again?
It's Robert Hupp, H-U-P-P, with CSC. Last week, Miguel Santana reached out to our group president, Mike Gaffney, and broached with Mike this issue around dealing with the costs. Mike indicated at that time that, yes, CSC was open and prepared to sitting down as plans firmed up and figuring out how to deal with the costs. I mean, we too have had cost impacts of these delays. And so, we would look forward to an opportunity to sit down, finalize the work that Jocelyn has summarized, finalize getting the completion plans in place, and we're working through the cost impacts.
That's correct.
Well, I don't know if it's a question. I think first I'd just make a point, which is I was probably the most skeptical of this whole project to begin with. And I reluctantly voted for it based on the assurance from staff and I believe from the companies that were anything to go wrong, the companies were going to make good on it, not the city filling any shortfall. So if I had even a sense that this would be a discussion rather than, okay, we know this is an extra cost for the city, we'll pick it up, I never would have voted for this contract to begin with. So I can say that up front. I'm very disappointed. I hope you'll take that message, and this shouldn't be much of a conversation. I know Mr. Zine said the same thing. Not going to get my vote to continue this Google contract in any way unless we are assured that any cost additions based on screw-ups that, I mean, there are always bugs in this kind of a system, so let me be more gentle than that. I anticipated that would happen in some way, but we should not be on the hook for that. And in no way will I support us being on the hook for that in any way, shape, or form. The only question I have is on the more general operation. I know people had complained about things like taking as much as 19 hours for an email to surface. Were those early bugs in the system as it was getting implemented? Are we still having those kinds of problems? And can we eliminate those?
We continue to have those kind of problems. A lot of them have been mitigated, but the fact of the matter is that as long as we continue to be on GroupWise to Google, we will continue to have some delays. There are some just inherent problems in the architecture that Jocelyn alluded to that are not compatible, and we've had some problems. We have fixed everything that we have come up against and know about. That doesn't mean that there won't be other things that will come up, and periodically, and even still, we seem to have some problems. So I can't sit here before the committee and say that we're not going to have any more problems, because coexistence of these two, non-compatible systems is going to cause us to continue having problems.
So are we assuming that once we have the final system in place and we don't have two incompatible systems coexisting, that most of these problems will in a way disappear of their own volition?
Yes.
So that, if it's an all Google system, I understand that would be very different than a Google GroupWise combination system.
Well, that's part of the problem that the users are experiencing. I'm not going to say it's solely based on this, but it certainly is impairing people's judgment about the system because, they don't know. Is it the network? Is it GroupWise? Is it Google? Is it, what is it? And we have to do a lot of research, and quite frankly, we don't have that much staff anymore that even knows, that's dedicated to this, that even knows this whole area. So the longer, that this takes, the more pain, it does put on our staff to be able to support both of these systems.
And to the extent that we need to, do we have the ability to pull back some staff on a consulting basis, 90-day contract, whatever?
Well, I'll be very honest. What we've done is Google and CSC have provided more resources to us, hasn't charged us, but to be able to fill in where we have been short.
good to know. Thank you.
Yes, and we would anticipate, as things move ahead with the LAPD, that there will be additional network resources that will be on call, which we utilized during the migrations.
Right. Thank you.
And let me just add one final thing, that this pain caused by the coexistence environment is not unique to the city. That is why for every client that we go live with, we actually make a very deliberate decision to make the period of coexistence as short as possible. And so...
Makes good sense.
Yeah, it makes good sense, and all the best practices written on this topic say the same thing.
Okay. Thank you. To the Google person, CSC, any other questions for them at the moment? Don't leave the room, no?
No, we're here.
All right. All right, just want to make sure, I don't have any public comment cards before me on this item. Did anybody expect to speak on public comment on this item? No? Okay, I'll open up public comment now. We're not done on this item, I just want to make sure that we cover this. Anybody here to speak on public comment on this item? Item number 1? Okay, no one coming forward. I don't have any public comment cards on this item, unless you're called up by the committee members or you're part of the staff. Public comment is now closed. Okay. To the CAO, would you like to outline your recommendations?
Our report has 3 recommendations. 1, to instruct the implementation group to delay implementation for LAPD until the security requirements are met. Pardon me. Instruct ITA to begin the migration of the remaining 6,000 employees as soon as feasible, but by the end of the first quarter. Further, to instruct ITA with the assistance of the implementation group to discuss and request with Computer Science Corporation and Google regarding the costs for our group-wise, and process any necessary contract amendments to implement, and then to instruct ITA, and I would amend this, actually, we had a previous report recommending the implementation of a technical oversight committee, and in my haste to do this last instruction, worded it incorrectly. We would like that technical oversight committee to report back on a citywide policy on email retention and the use of e-discovery by departments other than LAPD.
Which one are you correcting? Is that
Number 4.
4?
We had instructed ITA, and actually in a previous report, we had recommended the establishment of the oversight committee, and I intended to have that in this instruction and had a mistake.
Which one is this? 4? What,
Number
AD
4.
or C?
Number 4.
Okay. Chairman, could I ask for one direction? Is that, do we know when this is coming to council?
It has not been scheduled at this point.
Okay. I would like to, because this is in flux, I'd like to see if we can set a date for the council that's pretty quick, that we get it there. Secondly, that we ask that Google or CSC be present and to address the financial impact as to what their companies are going to do as it relates to the cities bearing the cost of running 2 systems, and that we also at council be able to receive a definitive completion date for public safety organizations in the city. So those 2 instructions go along with the recommendations, so that I think, for me anyway, the answer to those 2 will depend on whether I vote for the overall package. And again, I would like to make sure we do not go forward on the migration until it gets to council, because that's another issue.
Okay. Thank you. Those are
Give you an
2
enthusiastic second on that.
those are 2 instructions from Councilmember Parks, Chairman of the Budget Committee, and seconded by Councilmember Koretz. What I'd like to do at this time, members, is adopt these as the committee recommendations, to include where not in conflict, the CAO report, in addition to these items where they're not in conflict with the CAO report, inclusive of your 2 points, Mr. Parks. Instruct the Google Implementation Working Group to delay the implementation of the Google email and collaboration system for LAPD until all security requirements have been successfully met. Also instruct the Information Technology Agency to begin migration of the remaining 6,000 city employees as soon as feasible, but not later than the end of the first quarter of fiscal year 2010-11, which is the quarter we're in currently. Request the city attorney and instruct the CAO, CLA, ITA to request that CSC Google offset all costs that will be incurred by the city as a result of the implementation of the delays. Regarding the email retention and e-discovery, instruct the Information Technology Agency with the assistance of the city attorney, CAO, CLA, and LAPD to develop a policy on email retention and e-discovery. Instruct the Information Technology Agency to transmit the proposed policy on email retention and e-discovery to the Information Technology Oversight Committee to be chaired by which has also been instructed to be chaired by the CAO and also include the CLA and the mayor, as previously adopted by a previous council motion. Instruct the CAO to convene the Oversight Committee to consider the proposed policy, and if the Oversight Committee determines that maintaining e-discovery is unnecessary, to instruct the Information Technology Agency with the assistance of the city attorney to negotiate an offset to the CSC contract. Okay. Thank you very much. So with that, we have a majority complement of the IT committee, and we have that motion. It is all four votes aye? Yes. Okay. Approved by a majority of the IT committee and a minority complement of the budget committee. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. That concludes the 2 items on our agenda for today's hearing. Is there anybody else here for general public comment? Seeing and hearing none, general public comment is now closed. This hearing is now adjourned.